All right, hey everyone. So this is a video talking about exhaust options, or at least what I went through in terms of considering different exhausts for my 22 R8. So I'll hit on the factory sport exhaust I have versus a Kline I had in my 2018 V10 versus a QuickSilver, which is actually the option I ended up purchasing for this car. So to recap, this is a 22 V10 Performance rear drive, and it does have the factory sport exhaust package. What that means, it gives you the factory sport exhaust, which is an upgrade over the standard exhaust, and it gives you essentially a button on the steering wheel that allows you to, well, in theory, in the previous versions, it allowed you to just open the exhaust flaps full time. On the 22, unfortunately, hopefully Audi's listening, that no longer is the case, and it just gives you a sport mode, which means by default the flaps open at 5,500 RPM, and now the sport exhaust button, all it does is open them at 3,500. So extremely frustrating for owners, because now to have the flaps open full time, you have to buy an aftermarket controller and deal with that. Whereas we paid money to actually, well, have the button on the steering wheel like previous versions. And so why that's a big deal is, and I'll show you in the videos, when you're driving around with the flaps closed, the car is whisper, whisper, quiet. You don't hear any exhaust sounds. You can obviously hear the engine still, which is good, but you don't get any noise from the exhaust. You just kind of hear just airflow. And so with that, what I did is do a couple of videos here of the stock performance versus the Kline, and then I'll get into the why I chose QuickSilver and the exhaust. So here's a video of the performance stock exhaust driving. You can hear the valves open and close. So as you could hear in the video, you could hear the valves kind of open, close, loud, quiet, and that's what's really annoying. So you don't have the ability to keep the valves open anymore. When they're open, the stock sport exhaust sounds pretty good. It's not quite as loud or exotic sounding as some of the aftermarket options, but it does sound good. But again, the problem is I don't want to have to mash the throttle to hear any noise. When you just lift off the throttle, say you're just driving around town, you want to hear those awesome exotic tones of, an exotic V10 sound, and you don't get any of that with the 22 stock sport exhaust option. So it's not only about just the loudness, it's just unless you're over 5,500 RPM, you just hear silence, and it's not really what, for me, I'm looking for. So here's a couple Kline sounds just to hear what that sounds like. So those are a few Kline videos. As you could hear, it's more exotic, higher pitched, and louder as well than the stock sport exhaust. It's not even so much that it's that it's significantly louder, is just the tone itself is just more open, really allowing the V10 to breathe further. And the stock sport can sound and feel a bit muffled, even under a wide open throttle. The other huge factor is with something like a Kline or a QuickSilver, even with the valve closed, if you're driving around town, you still hear the exhaust. You can hear some exotic tones of the car. You don't have to mash the throttle to hear anything good. So you heard in the stock sport video, when the valves are closed, all you hear is like sucking air. You don't really hear anything from the engine or exhaust. It's just a fizzing noise that is not appealing at all. So by adding an aftermarket exhaust, even with a controller and keeping the valve closed, you have the ability to, drive on the highway with zero drone and have the car quiet if you want, or you could turn it into a more aggressive mode, still be driving around town with the flaps closed and not have to gun the car or get it over 5,500 RPMs to hear any good sound. So that's why going with an aftermarket exhaust plus a valve controller was a must option for me, because I don't always want to be flooring the car to hear any good noises. So now let's flip over to the QuickSilver exhaust and first start on the car. Okay, so now jumping to the QuickSilver install. You can see on the bottom is the stock sport exhaust. It weighs about 85 pounds, so it's very, very heavy. You see on the top the QuickSilver exhaust that I purchased that I'm going to put on. You could lift it with one hand easily, and less restrictive, way more sound, and lighter weight. And so to do the install, the full bumper needs to come off the rear of the car. So I had that work done at the local dealer. No cuttings required. It bolts straight on. You can actually see the exhaust outlets right there that the new exhaust will bolt onto. And so why I went with the QuickSilver over Kline, I had Kline on my previous two R8s, V8 and V10. I was very pleased with both of them. Has great harmonics. It's not maybe the loudest exhaust, but loud isn't always good. You want the right tones, the right type of sounds coming from the car, because a V10 is quite honestly plenty loud relative to other cars. So it's a loud engine, it's a loud exhaust to start with. So by putting on something super loud may not always be best. So that was one of my concerns with the QuickSilver. Some guys just want the loudest possible exhaust, whereas I want not only loud, but something that sounds really good. So I did go with the QuickSilver, and as you see here, the car's at the dealer getting the install done of the Vorsteiner wing as well as the exhaust. And on the 22, I had to buy some different parts to have swapped out in the rear bumper to be able to mount the wing. So I had to do that plus the QuickSilver exhaust. So I had all that done at the same time. Kind of made sense to do it at the dealer because they could, there was some coding involved and some other things. So they did a great job of just handling all of that for me. So I have a startup of the QuickSilver exhaust here in a second. Initial impressions are it's very, very loud. I would say that it is, with the valves closed on the QuickSilver, is about as loud as the Kline with the valves open, or pretty close. And so that's something I need to kind of adjust in my mind how I drive the car. And also, it's a whole different level in terms of sound. So does it sound better or not? I haven't had it long enough. I'm going to make some videos here coming up. I wanted to be able to let the exhaust break in a little bit, plus for me, drive the car around a little bit, get used to the sounds before I have an opinion on it. But for right now, it's, initial impression is it's super loud, and it sounds really good, obviously. And like I kind of was talking about earlier, even with the valves closed, you get really good exotic sounds from the car. So you don't have to be driving super fast with the valves open, and you still get some really good sounds coming from the exhaust, which is something that I'm really pleased about. So here's initial quick start, or initial start of the exhaust. Go for it. Okay, so that was the initial startup. Initial impressions of the startup, it's flipping loud, really loud. It was so loud that it had so much power, it actually blew some tools and stuff off the guy's workbench behind the car. And so there's going to be an adjustment for me. Thank God I got the valve controller that allows me to keep it open or closed. Initial driving impressions, like I talked about, I could drive the car with the valves closed, and you get really good exotic V10 noises at all speeds. Whereas as I showed in the videos with the stock sport exhaust with the valves closed, it's just whisper quiet. It's like an A4. And so for me, I'm really, really happy about that. On the flip side, it's so loud with the valves open. I've got an adjustment period. And so what I'm going to do is drive the car for a few weeks, let it cycle a few times, start to break in the exhaust before I do videos, and then I'll do some videos of the car driving around, compare all three exhausts with some real videos, and also start to formulate an opinion if the QuickSilver is too loud, how good the harmonics are, etc. Overall with the car, you can see it's looking really good. Really glad I added the voice center wing in the rear, the blacked out badges, the wrap on the carbon blades, and I have some aftermarket wheels coming. That's going to be the final thing for me as far as getting the car to where I want it. And you know, I love the look of the facelift in black. The headlights are tinted more black, and just the more aggressive fascia, and it has like a sleeker overall look to it, and couldn't be more pleased with how the car looks overall. And now it's just figuring out the sound, getting the car set up right there, getting the wheels set up properly, and then have my long-term R8. So thanks for watching, and what I'll again have next are some videos really zeroing in on the exhaust sounds and do my best to capture that to compare all three.